Hi, my name is Ishan Raval, and this is a video essay corresponding to my written essay, Vichara 1 Mangal. The link to that essay can be found below in the description. Now, before I get into it, I realized after recording the whole video that follows that I should probably stick to the intention that I laid out in my first video on this channel, in which I said that these videos will be shorter summaries or roadmaps of the full essays that I'm writing, around 10 or so minutes. So I have actually gone and made that video. So there is a sort of TLDR version of this full video essay, which is the second link in the description below. So that said, let's get straight into it. In the first video of my channel, I had introduced this project and what its objective is. This objective is simply and hugely to figure out what the good is. That is, so to speak, the North Star that we have here. What is it that is the ultimate good? Now, I had explained what this question means a bit last time as well. This will be the biggest doubt as sort of the central theme of the project, but I expanded upon the central question by explaining the question of the good as a question specifically for what is non-instrumentally good, what is good for its own sake, what we want there to be, not because it's useful for some other purpose, but because it is itself what has intrinsic value, so to speak. Something that we want there to exist just because it is itself what is good, because it is itself good. Now today, I want to start getting into that, start to explore what that thing really is, what the good really is, what the substance or form or defining attribute of the good really is. And the simplest way to start doing that is to simply look at the contenders, as it were, of what could be the good, things that we find to be good in a way that fill us up with this sort of affirmative spirit that, aha, here we have something that we really just want to exist for its own sake. And there are lots of such things that I do think that we have this feeling about, even if in our current sort of cultural, philosophical climate, we might be averse to thinking that those things are truly good with a big G apart from our preferences. We might just believe that, well, those are our preferences. So I'll start where we sort of tend to be, which is with our preferences. Because I do think that they lead us in the direction of getting to true quality, true merit, truly what is valuable. Now, so to look at some of these contenders, to start with, in terms of preferences. Well, I think most of you would agree that any painting, say by Monet or Turner, is going to be better than anything that I can paint, because I'm not an amazing painter. You might, if you have some kind of special connection to me personally, you might like my painting more sentimentally, but almost everyone's going to agree. I think everyone is going to agree that there's something better about the things that, say, a Turner paints compared to what I will paint. So quality art, high quality art, doesn't just have to be paintings. A jingle that I might compose will have nothing on some of the greatest compositions, say by Bach, say his Chaconne from the second partita. Now, those sorts of things are just make us feel like, yes, these don't have to have any sort of purpose beyond themselves. They're just amazing works. They're amazing creations. They're amazing entities in and of reality. Apart from that, we might also feel that a world in which they're just champion human beings, a world of Adonises and Aeneases, compared to, say, wimpy, loser man-childs is better. We think that there's something better about existences of excellence, and there's a lot to be qualified and unpacked about what that actually is, but that is sort of preference that we tend to have. talking of Adonis and Aeneas, that doesn't have to be just about figures of legend. Even, I think, in terms of champion sports performances, I think, for example, you would prefer a world in which the highest quality, say, of tennis being played is that which gets played by the Novak Djokovic's and Roger Federer's and Rafael Nadal's of the world, compared to one in which the highest quality might be that played by, say, Matteo Berrettini, who is probably top 20 right now in the grand scheme of things, a really good tennis player. Or, say, in the realm of football, you would want a world in which there could be football of the quality of, say, Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, as opposed to one that tops out at, say, the quality of a, would even the example be, I don't know, Wayne Rooney of yore, who again was a really good footballer. So these are preferences that we have. These are things that we consider to be just inherently good. Say a world in which there's, or so not a world, but simply the game played by a Lionel Messi. We don't think it has to exist for some other purpose. We just find that to be amazing. And what we find inherently good doesn't just have to apply for such grand matters like great paintings or compositions of music, or, you know, the sport played by the greatest champions. It can even exist for very commonplace, everyday things that we experience and things that we just happen to have in our everyday lives. Now, let me give an example. Say you are in a bus. Say you're sitting at the back of the bus, away from the entrance, and you come across, so there's a bus stop, and at the bus stop, a couple gets on, an elderly couple there. One of them is with a walking stick, and the other one, well, not with a walking stick, is still struggling, and they're sort of just leaning on each other, helping themselves onto the bus. And two situations. One, say the bus is full. The bus is full with random commuters, and in one situation, no one gets up for this couple. And in the other situation, two other young, able-bodied people do get up and yield their seats to this elderly couple. And they do so sincerely, graciousness, and there's the elderly couple graciously accepts these seats, and they feel gratitude, and there's like this beautiful little scene of barely not even 10 seconds that plays out. But we find something very heartwarming when something like that happens, and we are just happy that little social dance played out. Now, imagine that this couple is traveling on their way to, say, a family reunion. Their parents and their grandparents. So they have, let's say, a few of their children, a couple of their children, and their grandkids over there. Now, at this family reunion, their family members, like all humans, have their own sorrows, they have their own troubles, but by and large, it's a happy family. Everyone has their basic needs met. Everyone is vying in their own ways to live their best life. And everyone's sort of there having a good time. Yeah, there might be some people who don't get along as much with other people in terms of one-to-one relationships, but overall, it's a good scene. And that couple is sitting at a side of that banquet, of that family reunion at one point, and they're just admiring the scene of their family. They're feeling, we've done it. We've done our jobs. And I think that there is something in their feeling, that sense of success that they have, something that we might also find intrinsically valuable, and in what they are seeing in terms of having created and nurtured for a relatively successful social unit. The existence of such a relatively successful social unit, they might also consider to be of intrinsic value. And in general, I think that we tend to consider at least relatively successful social units to be of intrinsic value, taken up as we go at different scales to just like an overall flourishing, thriving society. So these are all sorts of things that we consider to be contenders for being just good with a big G, as it were. So there are things like artistic quality, there are things like respect, honor, a well-knit social fabric, the satisfaction of having basic needs met, to success, whatever that means for various people, enjoying others' company, the experience of enjoying each other's company, and the very fact of people enjoying each other's company and getting along, but also things like physical pleasure, positive physical sensations that, say, this family might experience in the course of the feast that they are having on a special occasion, the taste of the food on the tongue or in the nervous system, in the neurons, so to speak, the very feeling of physical pleasure. So all sorts of things we have as possible contenders for what is good. So, what is good among those things? Now, to streamline getting into the answer to that, I want to introduce two different sort of framings, two different ways of breaking these things down. Okay? So, one of these is that of states versus facts, or the subjective versus objective. I have no idea whether this is actually legible. It's my first time doing this. No test run. Now, states versus facts. Subjective versus objective. I think I'll start with those more commonly used terms. Subjective is basically what is experienced. Objective is basically what is out there. It doesn't have to be out there, so to speak, from our bodies or our minds, but to be more precise, it's things that can be seen, say, from a third person's perspective. And that could include seeing your own experiences from a third person perspective. Another more intuitive way, perhaps, of thinking about that is thinking about what exists from the point of view of the universe. Now, that can include our emotions. You can think about emotions from a third person's perspective, but it can obviously include things like a painting by Turner. States, or the subjective, on the other hand, are things that are just experiences themselves. So states of experience are subjective things. And that can be thought of as first-person reality. The experience not seen from a third-person point of view, but the experience in and as experienced. So that's one thing. The second one is this distinction that often gets made in philosophy between necessary and sufficient conditions. Now, if something is a necessary condition for something, then it has to be there in order for something else to be there. A Y chromosome, for example, is a necessary condition in order for there to be a male whatever, embryo, gamete, whatever. I don't know the exact term. There is no corresponding sufficient condition, however, I think. A sufficient condition is when the very existence of something is enough to show that there is something else. So, in fact, a Y chromosome is both a necessary and a sufficient condition to indicate male. If you know that one of the two chromosomes is Y, you can conclude that that is a male. So that is a sufficient condition for that. On the other hand, an X chromosome is neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition, because we need to know what the second chromosome is. So necessary and sufficient conditions. If something has to be there in order to call something, in order for something else to be the case, then it's a necessary condition. If something is all that's needed, if it's the sole and sufficient criterion, then that is a sufficient condition. So now, based on those two things, we can break down these lists, the sort of list of things that we made, into four basic questions in order to inquire about the good. Those are: one, is positive subjectivity, good experience, a sufficient condition for the good? Is positive subjectivity a necessary condition for the good? Is positive objectivity a sufficient condition for the good? And is positive objectivity a necessary condition for the good? Okay, So all of these possible contenders that we have can be broken down into these 4 questions. And in fact, these 4 questions can be broken down further into 2 questions that sort of wrap up those 4 ones. And those are, is positive subjectivity sufficient for the good, or is positive objectivity necessary? And the second one is positive objectivity sufficient for the good, or is positive subjectivity necessary? The reason why these reduced to these 2 questions is because if something is, say, if it turns out that positive subjectivity is not sufficient for the good, if the good isn't there, isn't present whenever there is positive subjectivity, that means something else apart from positive subjectivity is required. Now, what might be that something else that is required for there to be good apart from positive subjectivity? Well, it has to be something positive because it's a good we're talking about. But apart from the subjective, there's only the objective. So if positive subjectivity is not enough, then it has to be positive objectivity that is required. Positive objectivity then has to be a necessary condition if positive subjectivity is insufficient. And the same goes the other way around. If positive objectivity is not enough, then what might be required? It would have to be some kind of positive subjectivity that is required. So where to start with this? Now, let's start where we are. Let's start with the dominant conception of the good. The conception of the good that reigns supreme in the modern world, especially in the Western modern world. And in this conception, basically, the good is feeling good. In other words, positive subjectivity is a sufficient criterion of the good. Now, it doesn't matter what that positive subjectivity might be. It could involve all sorts of different things. It could involve, say, very highbrow pleasures like Bach's chaconne, or it could involve very lowbrow pleasures such as, I don't know, take your favorite Taylor Swift song. It can involve, in fact, pain. It can involve voluntary pain and struggle to achieve something. That can be part of someone's happiness. It can involve also just pure pleasure, from a nicotine buzz to orgasm. But whatever it is, if a person says, this makes me happy, then that is considered, in our present day ideology, to be good. Well, it's not, to be precise, not the thing that makes them happy. That's not what's good. They're being happy. However that is accomplished, that state is what is considered good. So this is basically the sort of central civilizational project of modern liberal, and I mean liberal in like the classic Enlightenment, the so-called Western Enlightenment sense, not in a left or right sense, but this is sort of the central civilizational project of liberal or Enlightenment society, which is to maximize or to create conditions in which individuals can maximize their happiness or well-being, however they define it. Because the happiness experienced by human organisms taken as individuals, taken as the happiness of human organisms taken by and for themselves as atomized individuals is considered good in the modern conception. So the question is that true? Basically, we're asking about this. Is it true that positive subjectivity is all that's required? Now, I want to be clear about the dominant conception in saying that it's not necessarily saying that there can't be other things that are good. Like, I'm not ascribing to the modern liberal worldview the idea that it would say that great works of art aren't correspondent in some way to intrinsic value. They don't have intrinsic value about them. What I'm saying is that according in our sort of, in the air we breathe, we tend to believe that if there is positive subjectivity, if there is individual happiness or well-being, that, you know, there are qualifications that doesn't infringe on the happiness of others, blah, blah, blah. But if there is positive subjectivity, that is enough for us to make the call, there is good over here. Now, is that true? Short answer, no. The long answer will involve a discussion of something that might make some viewers a bit uncomfortable, which is masturbation. And there's a reason why I think masturbation is the perfect case study for testing this philosophical standpoint that positive subjectivity is sufficient for the good. There are two reasons for that. There are two reasons why it's a perfect case study for that. One is that sexual pleasure of orgasm is just very intense. It's just a greater degree of pleasure than most pleasures are, say, such as, like, I don't know, scratching myself and then feeling an itch. In fact, compared to our baseline dopamine levels, eating chocolate raises that, for on average for people, about 1.5 times above baseline. Whereas the pleasure of orgasm raises our dopamine levels twice above baseline. And to put that in perspective, cocaine raises them just 2.5 times over baseline. So orgasm, which is a much more common experience, I think, in the world than gratuitous consumption of cocaine, is sort of halfway as pleasurable as between eating chocolate and snorting coke. So it's just a very intense form of pleasure. And the second reason is actually gets to the point itself that I'm trying to make, which is that it's pretty much the only experience, positive experience that we have that has pretty much no objective component to it. And I had to make a very important qualification at this stage, which is that what I'm saying now about masturbation is probably more applicable, perhaps more applicable to males than to females. I think what I'm talking about the experience and some of the valuelessness of that act is perhaps more true for men than for women. And I get more into that in the essay corresponding to this video, linked to the description, but I do recognize that. But I think that for most men, it's this activity that is very, very, very shameful. Or at the very least, it leaves men feeling empty afterwards. Especially when accompanied by pornography, I think. And the reason for that is not, I think, that we're not sex positive enough as a society, which is sort of like what you're supposed to believe. That's a politically correct thing to say. I think it's rather that might be true in the case of women, when women experience shame with respect to this. But I don't think that's the case for men. I think with men, it's that there is no objective correlate to this activity. There is nothing that it actually does in the world. There's no way in which just sitting there and pleasuring yourself as a man has any meaning in the world whatsoever. Now, even, say, being a total trash person over the weekend and doing nothing but sitting in your room, playing video games, eating junk food, or getting pizza ordered, just playing your favorite video game, I don't know, Fortnite or whatever, that still has, in some way, you're participating in some arc of history. You're participating in the mythos of gaming. You're participating in the mythos of being a trash person, basically. You're contributing, you're furthering a certain type of existence. There's no corresponding mythos or historical narrative, i.e. a social component involved with masturbating. Especially for men, it is a completely private activity. I think that even a group of heroin junkies might get together and talk about their consumption of heroin, thereby being part of something bigger than themselves, as weird as it is to say that in the context of being a heroin junkie. But a group of men who are avid masturbators, say, there's not going to be any collective self-consciousness of that, because that's just not going to come up. It is the one form of pleasure, of positive subjectivity, for which there is no objective correlate. And I think that's why we tend to find ourselves feeling so empty afterwards. It's because something objective is indeed necessary when we feel, when there is positive subjectivity. Positive subjectivity by itself does not cut it. Some objective correlate is necessary. So what is it that is actually good, objectively, in the objective realm of things, that has to be there? Now, this is really getting into the question of what is good, and there's not going to be an answer to that today. I just want to start dipping into it because the dominant conception of the good at least has something positive, like in terms of something substantive, an answer it's giving in terms of what the good is, which is individual happiness or well-being. So what might something like that, in terms of something objective that is necessary, what might that be? And there are two things that we're just going to quickly look at today. One is that whenever we see something that strikes us as good, to go back to our prior example, say a great painting, there's a way in which it is special, a way in which it stands out from the rest of reality. I just realized I have no idea why I'm holding this in my hand. I have not looked at it. I think I've looked at it once. For your hands, better for talking. A great painting has something rare about it. It's not like their other paintings. It's a pick-me painting. It's rare, basically. It's in some way unique or unlikely as a thing in and of reality. Now, even when we find people whom we love to have intrinsic value, we tend to see something rare about them. At least we tend to perceive that about them. That's how we orient ourselves towards them, whether or not that is the case. We tend to see them in a way, so certain phrases of our language get at that. When we say that someone is a gem of a person, that someone is just so precious, that gets at that. We see them as just rare or unique in some way, quantitatively unlikely compared to the rest of what that set might be, in this case of other persons. But there's an example in which that might not seem to work as well. That is the case of, going back to our example of the elderly couple on the bus, an act of kindness towards strangers. Now, that doesn't necessarily strike us as rare. We live in a world in which there are many acts of kindness, thankfully. Maybe not as many as there should be, but it's not altogether rare to see that sort of a scene play out on a bus or a train. Although, I must say, much more rare in the West compared to the East. Now, although, to be fair to the West, usually somewhere in the other will give up their seats. But in any case, that's not exactly rare, it seems. However, it is rare. But what's rare about it is not exactly those behaviors, those acts or emotions over there. We are seeing something as rare, but what we're seeing as rare is the world that is reflected in or demonstrated through such an act taking place. What we're seeing is that among all the possible worlds that there could have been, from a bare, big rock revolving around the sun, to a world in which everyone's just horrible to each other, in which people don't operate with notions of reciprocity or of some kind of kindness. And I get that this isn't actually too realistic an example, because a certain kind of altruism is wired into our brains. But the very fact that such altruism is wired into our brains is something rather beautiful. And we have this world among all of the universe. That is this unique world in which these sorts of social dances do take place. And that is just something really beautiful. We live in a world in which we take care of each other, in which we feel fondness for each other. And this gets to the second thing. The second thing that we see often, which is, that this is a very rarefied world. So if rare is quantitative, rarefied is somewhat qualitative, though, as this line will demonstrate in probably future videos and essays, they're not exactly independent. Now, what I mean by rarefied is that basically there's just a lot going on over there. Again, going back to our dead rock example, there's a lot more going on in this world, not just through humans, but also through the phenomenon of biological life in general. There's just so much more going on over here. And even apart from, so the natural world is a tremendous example of this, but I think that even in the case of cultural creations, say, to go back to Bach, there's just so much more going on with all of his compositions, pretty much, compared to, say, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, to take a relatively non-controversial example, because I do not want to offend and alienate certain people who are into certain pop artists. But we can, or to take another example, take like a glorious work of architecture, say the city palace of Udaipur, the Taj Mahal, or the Villa Savoy, designed by Le Corbusier. There's just a lot more going on over there compared to like your average house in an Indian housing colony or your average McMansion. There's something more going on in terms of its structure, its function, and in terms of the information and qualia, the experience that it creates, that is just more rarefied in a certain way. So we see these things, and one of the most interesting parts of this overall chunk of reflection that I've been on is, in fact, I don't have time to get into it, but is about what exactly makes that sort of scene, that sort of social dance of an act of kindness on that bus, what makes that rarefied. And that there's an interesting recursivity to that I've explained in the essay accompanying this. I do encourage people who are so far engaged by this, which is quite a lot of time so far, half an hour engaged by this, to go and look at that. But so there we have the rare and the rarefied. And I want to make this important qualification that this isn't what makes something good. This isn't itself necessarily the quality of goodness. We haven't gotten to it just yet. All that I'm saying right now is that when we find something to be intrinsically valuable or an end in itself, we also happen to see rareness or things, or the rarefied. And those aren't themselves the definitive qualities of goodness. They just happen to be there when we see something good. There's need to go deeper than this. But anyway, so far you're settled. The subjective is not sufficient and the objective is necessary. The objective, to get towards it, has something rare and rarefied about it. Now, the objective is necessary and the subjective is not sufficient, which raises the question, is the subjective necessary at all? Or does positive subjectivity, some kind of positive experience, is that not even necessary for there to be good? So that leads us to this question. Is positive objectivity sufficient, or is positive subjectivity necessary? And I'll keep this exposition short, but the short answer is no, and the slightly long answer, not as long as I took for this part, is a thought experiment. Let's say there's a world in which we can look on this world with entities that look and behave just like humans. and the marvelous world, a much more marvelous world than the world we live in, a world in which there's peace and justice and freedom and all these politico-ethical ideals that we may be interested in, but also that is just marvelous aesthetically. There's natural environments are perfectly taken care of. You know, there are amazing ecosystems that have been resuscitated or even created afresh. There's amazing art and architecture that is created. These people go to symphonies and listen to amazing compositions, and they weep tears of joy when they're over there, except they don't feel anything when any of this is going on. There's no qualia, which is a philosophical term for like it's hard to explain, for the very qualitative aspect of experience. There's nothing actually experienced over there. There's just an input-output system, so to speak, where with a certain sort of external stimuli, a certain behavior or function takes place, but there's no real experience of it. So this is actually the case of what is called the philosophical zombie, if you're interested. So if these P-zombies, as they're called, exist, if there were a world of this, would we find that good with a big G? Would we find that, yeah, if us type of entities that actually do have experience were to disappear and be replaced with that, would that be like, would we be happy about the universe? And I think while that might be cool, if they make really cool things, that might be cool, I don't think most of us would find that to really cut it. We want there to be real elation and grief even, and struggle and daring and vigor and just overall things of real spirit that real organisms and maybe other beings of substrates apart from carbon may be able to accomplish, but some real experience is necessary to also be there. We don't just want a world in which, you know, automatically grand cathedrals and monuments and things are built. We want there to be the vitality and spirit that accompanies those things with all the pleasure and pain that involves. So that is what we have for today. TLDR, TLDW, whatever the good is, we know that positive subjectivity is not enough for that. The mere fact of something feeling good is not enough. That's not exactly in itself where the good is. Something objective is necessary. And whatever that objective component is, it has something that is rare and rarefied, or rare or rarefied, and be looking at the connection into those things more further. But also, some kind of positive experiential element is also necessary. And what that is, we'll be starting to get deep into that in the next video. The next video will be predominantly about the subjective side of things, not the objective side of things. So there you have it. Stay tuned. See you next time.